Okay, in this video, we're gonna review how to write proofs. So for your notes, let's see, you're going to write the problem, and diagram, mark the diagram where I mark the diagram. And then write each statement and reason. Okay, so we're going to do this, which is the segment proofs, and then we're going to do another one. I think, let me just check, there should be two. Okay, hold on, let's do. And then there's going to be another one that we're going to do with the vertical angles. So we're going to do a segment proof, and then we're going to do an angles proof. All right, so complete the two. I listed all the reasons, though. I listed the reasons, and then the statements are already done. So we're just going to walk through what the reasons are, and we'll cross them off as we use them. So this problem says it's given to us that GJ is segment GJ is congruent to segment GI. K is the midpoint of GJ. H is the midpoint of GI. And then they want us to prove that segment GK is congruent to segment GH. All right, so let's take our time to understand the problem, right? That's the first step. Understand the problem, what's being given to us and what we're being asked to do. So first things first, we've got GJ is congruent to GI. Okay, so where is GJ? So GJ is this side of the triangle, and GI is this side of the triangle. And now these two yellow lines are congruent, so they're the same size, same measure. So that means that if GJ, well, we'll put numbers to it in a minute just to kind of see what we're going to have to do, because there's a lot of steps here. So K is the midpoint of GJ. Looking at K is the midpoint of GJ. All right, so if K is in the middle, what can you say about the distance from G and the distance from J? It's equidistant. So GK is going to be congruent to KJ. I'll draw those little tick marks. And then it also tells us that H is the midpoint of GI. So H is the midpoint of GI. So I can say that GH and HI are congruent. So that's both of those, saying that they're congruent. That's the definition. Saying those segments are congruent. That's the definition, that's the midpoint theorem. Okay. Now we want to prove that GK is congruent to GH. We want to prove GK is congruent GK here is congruent to GH. Well, let's kind of figure that out. So let's put some numbers to it, see if we can make it make sense. If GJ is congruent to GI, let's just say maybe this was 10 units long, and GI, we said they're congruent, so maybe this is also 10 units. Okay, by definition of congruence, they have the same measure, okay? Now, if K is the midpoint of GJ, then we said these two segments are congruent to each other. Well, if GJ is 10, then half of that would be 5, and then this would also be 5, right? And then here, H is the midpoint of GI. So if H is the midpoint of GI, then GH is congruent to HI. But once again, GI is 10, so that would make GH would have to be 5 and HI would have to be 5. So since these two have the same measure, right, by definition of congruence, again, since they have the same measure, they're congruent to each other. Okay, and then that kind of proves that these two are congruent. So let's just look and see what they're saying. K is the midpoint. Well, what's the first one always going to be? It's always going to be given. In this case, we have a couple to choose from. So let's go ahead and say it's given to us that K is the midpoint and H is the midpoint. Okay, so GK is congruent to KJ, GK is congruent to KJ. Well, that's the definition of a midpoint. GH is congruent to HI, GH is congruent to HI. That's also the definition of a midpoint. So that's the midpoint theorem. All right, now going from this step to this step, we have if two things are congruent, and then we have that they have the same measure. Well, that's the definition of congruence, right? If they're congruent, then they have the same measure. Whoops, let's just do congruent for the sake of bolded. Okay. Now, I used it one time. I've got 2 more times I can use it. Okay. So we have GJ is congruent to GI. GJ is congruent. Well, that's something else we've also been given, and that's okay because I have a second one here. So let's go ahead and say, well, that's something we've been given. Oops, given. Okay. Now here we go again. We've got 2 congruent segments have the same measure. Once again, that's the definition of congruence. Okay, congruent means same measure. Okay, and then we've got, right, so we've got GJ is equal to GK plus KH. GJ is equal to GK plus KH. Well, I'm adding segments right? I'm adding segments to get the whole segment. Okay, I'm adding the two segments to get the whole segment. That's the segment addition postulate. Okay, almost done. So let's go ahead and cross off what we used. Oop, did I use two of these? I did use two of these already. Okay, now if I said my two segments are equal, as I did, if I said my two segments are equal, and then I have this other equality here, right? So GK plus KJ, that's here. And then GH plus HI, I could substitute here. So that's what they're doing, right? They're substituting, substitution property of equality. Right? Substituting is when you replace S-U-B-S-T-I-T. Of equality. Okay. Now, once again, so GK though, GK is staying, but we said GK was equal to KJ. So we are replacing something equivalent here. And then we said that HI was equal to GH. So we are replacing again. So that's going to be substitution property of equality again. Okay. Now when you add, right, you have 1 GK plus 1 GK, and you get 2 GK. So we're adding 1 plus 1 is 2, right? 1 plus 1 is 2. So we're just adding. Now you can divide both sides by 2, right? Divide by 2, divide by 2. The 2's will cancel, and you get 10. So let's cross off what we have. We've got, we added, we divided by 2, we use substitution property of equality again. So we've got divide by 2. I think that's where we left off. Here, right, we divide by 2. Okay, and then the last step, we have two segments that have the same measure, means they're congruent. That's another definition of congruence. Okay, so we're actually going to stop the video here because we're already at 13 minutes, but I'll put the other one up as part of the review. Okay, so make sure you write the whole proof. I want to see the whole proof. I want to see the question, the given, the proof, the diagram, and then work through each of the statements and each of the reasons. Okay, that's it.